Express Media acknowledges that the National Editing and Writing Students' Conference is being streamed from the stolen lands of the Wurundjeri and Bunurong peoples of the Kulin Nation. We also pay our respects to the traditional custodians of the lands on which our artists speak from. We pay respect to the elders of these communities past and present and extend that to emerging community leaders. We recognise that sovereignty was never ceded and that colonisation is an ongoing process. It was, is, and always will be Aboriginal land.
Hello.
Hello.
I want to start by acknowledging that I'm we're StreamYarding in from the lands of the Yaru people in the northwest Kimberley. I'm in Broome at the moment, and pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. I've been here for about 4 months, but I have lived in the lands of the Wurundjeri people in the Kulin Nations for about the last 10 years. Do you want to do your acknowledgement as well?
Yeah, I'm streaming from the lands of the Kulin Nations, from Wurundjeri, Bunurong, Whiterun, Tangarang, and Djadjarong peoples. So yeah, I'm in Footscray, Melbourne, by the Maribyrnong on Bunurong and Wurundjeri land. So yeah, also want to pay respects to their elders, past and present. Yeah, excited to be here.
And do you want to introduce yourself first?
Oh yeah, sure. I'm Jinghua. I write a bunch of different things, edit things sometimes. You may know my work from, I don't know, I write and present for China Tonight on ABC TV on Monday nights, often in The Guardian, Saturday paper, mainly as a critic, and also write a bunch of kind of esoteric things, like catalogue essays and, this and that. Yeah. You, Maddee?
Yes, so I'm Maddee Clark. My pronouns are he, him. And yeah, like I said, I'm in Broome at the moment. Or a visual description of myself for anyone who needs a visual description. I'm just some guy in a room with white walls wearing a green t-shirt with black curly hair. I got a haircut yesterday, and then I went swimming, so my hair's very messy and salty. And I'm a writer. I've been, I guess, publishing my writing for about 7 or it could be almost 10 years. As a freelancer, I've written I wrote for the Saturday paper doing an interview column called The Influence for about a year. And then I've also written for Lifted Brow and Overland and a few other sort of literary publications and ABC, SBS, doing commentary, nonfiction, criticism and analysis, and I guess reviewing and interviewing. And yeah, it was similar to what Jinghua's done, like quite a lot of, I guess, review essay and arts criticism and arts catalogue writing and copywriting and that kind of thing. I've edited for a few different places as well, and currently I'm working as an editor professionally, part-time, and also I'm a researcher. So I write academic work as well as sort of nonfiction and writing for trade, I suppose. What else?
I totally forgot to do the visual description. Sorry. So yeah, this is Jinghua again. I am wearing a black shirt, glasses. I have short hair that I shouldn't have got cut just when it got so cold. I'm wearing big black headphones, and I'm in my study, which has a bunch of posters and books and plants in the background. Cool.
I'm just going to maybe we could start by I'll just ask you, like, what is it that you do at the moment? I remember once you made a list of all the different freelance writing things you'd done in a year, and it was really long. So I guess, like, what is a sort of a snapshot of like I guess, your professional life at the moment?
At the moment, yeah, it changes a lot, sort of seasonally or month to month, even week to week. So I think I have kind of a constant sort of like pie chart of different things. And in the past, it's been probably more writing and editing, with most of that writing being nonfiction and criticism, like sort of journalistic writing. And then in the last year, it's also been television and teaching. So sort of mentally, I guess the categories are writing. I think of it as like writing for print or digital, like text writing, television writing and presenting, teaching. So I teach podcasting at University of Sydney, sorry. And then bits of other things like editing, copywriting, proofreading, transcribing, events like this, performances sometimes, so readings. So yeah, a bunch of other things, but probably the big things recently are writing for TV, writing not for TV, and teaching are probably the trifecta currently. How about you?
I think right now it's probably like a good chunk of it is like academic work, research work, and another big chunk of it is editing work in-house at Magabala Books, which is kind of like, copy editing, production, all kinds of like publishing work, and also actual editing, and I guess project management of editing, and then like still maintaining, I guess, a freelance writing practice, but I think it occupies probably a lot less of my week to week now than it would have done a year ago or 2 years ago. I think there was about 6 months once where I was subsisting purely on freelance writing. And now I think most of my work is kind of more formal. But when I'm writing, like journalism stuff, interviews, reviews, commentary, and the occasional kind of nonfiction personal essay almost kind of thing. Mostly writing about other people, or literally interviewing other people, or writing a profile, or writing a profile of a show, like an art show or something like this. So quite a lot of arts journalism actually. Not what I imagined doing when I thought of myself as a writer.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, the ways that our writing practices have sort of shifted back and forth between writing that's more either creative or personal to things that are more about other people, like that are more interviews and reporting, and I mean even criticism. I guess it's about someone else's work. So in terms of how you ended up at the current point, where did you start and how did you get here?
I guess I started writing essay and criticism, and op-ed mostly, and then
how did you start doing that?
I started doing that by I think you encouraged me to pitch a piece to Overland based off a Facebook post that I made, and I did, and I got it, and then after that I started to like find more opportunities in freelance writing to publish more of my stuff, and I guess, like you said, like more sort of events come your way to the point where like you can kind of, I guess there's like the panel industry, the panel industrial complex
Yes.
Which I think that if somebody really committed themselves to it, could make a living off of that for a good amount of time. If you wanted to be a career panelist, but I wouldn't advise it because it's not very fun. But I do think that like lots of opportunities like this kind of tend to come up, like you said, seasonally, as festivals or events or cultural happenings are going on in the art world and the arts and culture world, and especially around major cities. So I think that a lot of what I was doing was kind of following that as as almost like a trade in a way as a writer. Like that is the kind of self-promotional work that you're you sort of have to do or must do to maintain a creative practice that's sustainable, which can feel like it can be a little bit exhausting. So I do think that like now that I have sought out and like gotten a little bit more formal editing work and that kind of thing, I'm a little bit more comfortable with a more routine working life, I suppose. But I did sort of do, like I said, I relied on freelancing for quite a long time as a writer and with varying success. How did you find the transition between, I guess, professional journalism and freelancing almost full time?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's sort of been back and forth because I went into, actually maybe I'll start with like how I started kind of from dot or from a blank space. I guess there was never a blank space because I wrote as a child. I kind of never stopped writing and was like made zines and had blogs, like had a million blogs as a teenager and stuff. So I kind of just the writing never went away, but the ways of trying to get published and the ways of trying to get paid, I think, have changed. I guess the kind of the kind of writing I do has changed as well, but that's sort of been maybe more constant or more organic because it's just whatever I'm thinking about. But yeah, I went from kind of starting off in like a zine space and then spoken word and performance, and then into getting a couple of personal essays and this was in peak personal essay heyday, like 15 years ago. So back in the day of big personal essay, I had a couple of pieces in Peril, which is an Asian Australian arts and culture magazine, and in Overland, and was sort of just publishing very sporadically, like a few pieces a year. And then I got a job in journalism, but I actually didn't really know that it was a journalism job when I applied for it. So I applied for a job as a writer at a publication in Shanghai and moved to China for it, and sort of through the recruitment process realized that it was going to be more like a reporter job than I had thought of it as like initially as like a magazine writer job. Anyway, so then was like headfirst in journalism for a few years. In Shanghai, and then came back to Australia and kind of shifted more into arts reporting, and then two different stints of trying to be a full-time freelancer. One that was like, I would say, quite a dismal failure, and then the current one, which has been more successful, which has been really interesting because, I'm like, well, I'm the same person with the same skills pitching the same work, and it has, I think, been quite telling for how fickle this industry is and how kind of chance and fortune based it is, and fashion based. So I think that because I'm the same person with the same skills and approach, and it's just been certain coincidences that have worked in my favor this time around, more so than a couple of years ago. So that's kind of been interesting to watch, and and it is disappointing. I think it is. I think there are a lot of injustices, I guess, that are really apparent when you watch how the industry operates.
What do you think it is that made freelancing a failure for you then and successful now? Like, what's going on in the industry that's enabling that to be the case?
I think that, so I changed my name, and also, I guess, was sort of transitioning shortly before I went to China. So I came back from being overseas. That was the first stint when I was freelancing. So it felt like I was starting from scratch. I came back with a name that very few people in Australia knew. Often when I was applying for things, people assumed that I was a new migrant. So that was interesting because I got, I guess, a side of racism and prejudice that I hadn't. I guess that I was experiencing differently, and very obviously, like, I would apply for jobs and people would be like, just checking, like, do you have a work visa? And, I'd been in Australia, other than a few years away, I'd been in Melbourne 30 years at that point. So, so I think coming back, I was starting from kind of even a lesser position than before I went overseas. So it was partly that, and having even I think dipping out for a while, being less visible, kind of having to build those relationships up again. And then the second time round, I guess the thing that made it successful was a combination of, like, having spent a couple of years rebuilding all of that, sort of reestablishing myself, having new relationships, having a bit more of a focus. So I think at that point I was more focused on two segments of the writing world, which was arts reporting and criticism, and then on the other hand, sort of China journalism and opinion and thinking. And I realized that I had to, like, build those as sort of like two different careers, even though they were both in writing and editing. But as that sort of started to build, and then I think the confluence of China being in the headlines nonstop, and that being a specialization that's kind of useful and to people, and that media outlets are looking for. I think race and trans stuff being in the media in particular ways. And then I think actually the pandemic has, it made a lot of things harder in some ways, but then it made things easier in a bunch of ways, partly I think because some people left the industry, other things became more accessible. And then also I think the big thing for me was I was on the dole for like a year, which I wouldn't have been able to, which I didn't get when I first, when I was freelancing the first time, and then being able to have it and then have the coronavirus supplement, it meant that I could, I was able to live off that. And so I was able to approach things and pitch and, find work strategically for what I knew would be useful for building a career, rather than being like, oh, I should take the $300 story instead of the $200 story, even though it's for a smaller or less reputable publication or whatever it is. So being able to, that was probably the biggest difference, to be honest. Yeah.
So you had time to sort of actually think about, how do I practice my writing as a trade and actually like develop it as such, and like respond to what's going on in the world around me and try to make this more sustainable. Hey,
I think that's probably one of the biggest things that I've learnt over, whatever it's been, 15 years of writing and publishing, is having your own sense of where you want to go, and also having maybe better judgment for what opportunities to take and what to say no to, which I think is really hard to work out. But I think developing that sense has been really useful. Yeah.
It's really... Sorry.
No, go on.
Oh, I was going to say, like, there's this real, like, interesting pattern, like when you were talking about, like people, I guess, wanting I don't know, like why freelancing succeeds more in certain times than others. And I feel like maybe we're living in this economic situation where lots of these big organizations like media bodies, maybe, and news outlets are really like contracting out a lot of work, and like finding freelancers to do a lot of work, which can be probably financially advantageous for them in lots of ways. And in response, like a lot of writers, like there's this temptation to be like extremely agile, and it's almost like becoming really cool to be extremely agile and to be able to work at whatever, you know. And I think I've had a couple of experiences of people maybe approaching me and saying like, do you want to curate this show? And I think the first time I curated an art show, I was like, people go to university to learn how to be curators. I've never curated anything before. And they said it doesn't matter. You know, like, I'm just encouraged to be this person who can do anything for anybody. But like you said, like when you start doing those things, you actually have to really build a practice in each one of them because they are crafts in themselves. So that's kind of interesting to think about, like specifying, like letting yourself take the risk of being specific in a practice.
Yeah, and knowing what you don't want to do, I guess. Especially I think for when you are approached in part because of, you know, an identity or a lived experience, you know, having your own boundaries around that and what you want to you know, what you're comfortable sharing and disclosing and what you're not, and the kind of writer you want to be, I guess. Like sometimes I'm like, well, that's not a perspective I actually have an opinion that I want to publish, I guess. Like it's not, I'm not just there to be a body or to be a face or a name. So I think, yeah, being conscious of the commodification of identity in those writer spaces, yeah, and that's something that I think you just sort of learn by doing. But yeah, it's definitely worth reflecting on and kind of giving yourself time to reflect on all these decisions and not just because I think there is so much pressure when you're starting out because there's such a sense of scarcity to just take every opportunity that comes towards you and to feel like you know, you should be grateful for everything. And sometimes like maybe it is objectively a good opportunity, but it's not for you. I do think like I got a lot out of, I think, starting out in a way where I sort of just did like bits of a random bunch of things until I worked out, you know, until I found my own sense of direction, I guess, like in that mud. But yeah, and I don't really I don't have any sort of regrets, but I think yeah, it's been good to be like, just because it might sound like a good opportunity on paper, it might not actually benefit my practice or me as a person.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to ask you more about Peril, but do you have any other directions you think we should go in before we?
Yeah, we can talk about Peril. I guess I'm wondering what. No, let's do that, and then I have more questions for you.
Well, all right. I just wanted to know about Peril because I guess, like from my memory, Peril was almost completely like almost volunteer run or paid. Like, you know, when sporadic funding did come in back when you were involved, and that is kind of like one of these like really what I think of as like a real grassroots writing publication kind of that was lived experience based, community building. And actually at the heart of it was like it is still, I think, like continuing like a really active and like, you know, like a community with deep connections to each other. And I wonder if like just reflecting on like your involvement there, like thinking about stuff like that is like kind of the grassroots stuff where the really good material is being published and how that sort of stuff fits into like the modern, you know, like the arts ecology of 2022, I guess.
Yeah, well, fuck.
Because the reason I ask you is because that's where a lot of our really good quality writing experiences come from.
Yeah, totally. And I think, you know, often I think when people ask about, say, like mentorship or professional development, I'm like, oh, well, I got a lot of that from being involved in things like Peril. And I think, and that's always I think what I say if people are like, when should I work for free, or what kind of, when is it okay to, when is it a good idea to take unpaid work? And I think when it is, building a community that you have real like ownership over, and that is, a mutual, I guess, a system of mutual support, and where also like, I guess for some of those things, like the process of getting paid would require a lot of compromises, like creative and ethical compromises. So yeah, I mean, I think that, writers and editors should be paid wherever possible, but I think that, for instance, like going for funding for government funding, like does, often involve a reframing that can like damage, like your intentions.
Or just make you feel like you're your time, and it's like makes you feel really paid, and
yeah, and also then you're spending however many hours doing that instead of the thing. So you kind of just have to assess whether that's valuable. But yeah, I think those spaces are really have been really important for me. And I think whenever I've all of the unpaid work I've done that I have zero regrets about, and that I think was like super nourishing, is the stuff that either was just my own and I had like full creative control, or it was it was critical of the industry and its processes in a way that wouldn't be possible, like, while like going in the grain of the industry, or it was sort of building these communities. But it's been interesting to see, like, for instance, I think, I think it's been interesting to see, like, for instance, like Whiterun Spaces try to like get bits of publications like Peril, or like how institutions try to partner with, and there are so many other like autonomous people of color run, or whatever group run publications and collectives and sort of creative projects, and then sometimes people try and get like slices of that, and seeing how that's sort of changed over the last decade or so that we've been kind of watching the industry has been like pretty telling. Just like but yeah, I look for the spaces where you're the center and not the special programming, and you're not like
it's like, it makes me think like that's values driven creative work, really, that sort of thing. It's not like, and it's a little bit different doing it that way when it's like grounded in lived experience and the model of autonomy you're talking about. But then you're right, like the demand for lived experience content in the market is also present at the same time.
And it's a very specific kind of content, both in the subject matter and the style. And sometimes there's really great writing that comes out of that, that genre or that format. But it can also be, I think, quite restrictive. And also, I think it's one of those things, like if you're a writer of color starting out, especially as a young writer, like I think it is just very easy to get pulled into like the sinkhole of that niche, especially if you have, I guess, an intersection of identities that isn't like particularly common, to sort of just find yourself like pulled into that space. And it might be where you want to go anyway, or you might, there might be opportunities there that are useful. But yeah, I think being like, actually, you don't have to do that. You don't have to do writing that is about your identity, or that is, personal essays or, you know, memoirish. You don't ever have to write about your family. You don't have to tell anyone, you know, who your parents are. Like that's not compulsory. Yeah.
No, but it doesn't hurt your career to write the personal essay, does it, sometimes?
Yeah, and you can do it. You can always angle those things, you know, sort of the way you want. But yeah, I think there was a point where I think like the first few panels and stuff I did were all like some kind of racialized identity panel, you know, and often it was like the multicultural panel at the White Festival, that sort of thing. And it was really hard to say no to, or to say like, oh, I will only do this if it is this and this set of questions and this label and this group of people.
Yeah.
Especially when like that's the only work you're getting. Yeah.
Those mastheads and magazines and arts bodies, they're not promoting you. They're not doing the work of promoting you. They don't care if you're famous or not. They don't care if your career is sustainable often as well. They just, you know, they want your writing.
Yeah, and also I guess like figuring out like maybe you don't want to be famous. Maybe you don't want to being like, actually there's I guess this is sort of a, you know, a constant sort of quandary, but it's like sometimes you want your opinion on certain things out there. Maybe you don't, maybe you never want to write opinion, but sometimes you also like, I want my voice published on certain things, but I don't always want me along with it, you know, so finding especially say as a critic or as an arts critic, that is one of the that is like a structure that I enjoy, and that's a way to have an opinion, but where it's like not necessarily, you know, it's not about you. And same with like political commentary, I think. There can be a real, I guess, gap between, even though it's, you know, sort of the same thing, I think publications still see a difference between like lived experience writing and analysis, and opinion can kind of be somewhere in the middle, and thinking about how those threads come together in my own writing, but also in how publications might approach you know, everything in that sphere, you know, whether it's like first person lived experience or expert analysis, and you know, and trying to think about how to exist in those spaces while also like demolishing the concept of the expert.
Right. That's so interesting. I think I'm really interested too in like how, you know, because I think you and I maybe align in the way that we both speak, like we're really like writing's very something that's really close to us, and like that we really enjoy and have always enjoyed doing as a practice before we started making money from it. So it can be kind of strange to find yourself in the position of writing an op-ed about a topic and being like, how did I get here? Where like from, you know, writing being something that's highly emotive and personal and that kind of thing, and something you do to process like your life and what's going on, to communicate things to other people, and then you find yourself in journalism, for example, but then surprisingly, I think for me, and maybe for you as well, like you do also find yourself getting very invested in the stories that you're looking at and like getting a lot of energy out of that. And for me, like in arts writing, sometimes I find myself having these like intensely intimate, wonderful experiences writing about other stuff that's not to do with me at all. And so like I can be quite content doing that. But yeah, sometimes I find myself doing commissions that I just don't care very much about, and that feels really alienating as well. Because you feel like you're trying to produce emotion for an audience because there's like, it's a good commission and you know that it's going to be good for your bank account, you know it's going to be good for your career ultimately, and it helps you to have a sustainable practice that enables you to do the creative work that you want to do as well.
Yeah. I think it is really important in terms of like making a sustainable practice to have to have a range of work that you have like different levels of emotional and intellectual investment in. So I don't want to I don't want to write something I don't care about that's sort of like very public, but doing things like, whether it's like audio production or editing, or copy editing or proofreading or transcribing, like things that have that I'm less like emotionally invested in, but also like there are a different kind of thinking and different kind of skills is really important, I think, for having a sustainable practice. Like I don't think you can have 100% of your work be something where you have to like generate an original idea, be super like personally invested in it, and deliver a piece of writing that you think is like incredibly beautiful. Like if you hold yourself to that standard for like every single thing you do, you won't be able to survive.
Yeah, and if
So
that's
I
your
think,
if that's your model of artistic integrity as well.
yeah. So try to figure out the way to have integrity in, I guess, the things that matter in that way, but also having some work that gives you like a little bit of I don't know, emotional downtime or something that's like less tied to you and your soul. You
Yeah.
can't put like all of yourself in everything.
No.
It's also, you feel really exposed when you put
Yeah.
all of yourself in everything.
Mm.
For that kind of work, whether it's criticism or other kinds of writing, how have you found the process of working with editors, and what, is there any advice you'd have for writers starting out for what to expect or how to negotiate it?
I think that I've had some wonderful experiences with editors, and a lot of them are editors working for literary publications, where they do speak with and edit a lot of different types of writers, like emerging and established. Sometimes editors can be really difficult to work with, even people who have, been professionally in editing for a really long time, can be really careless and can communicate in a way that's like really abrupt and sometimes hard to understand through email. And sometimes they're just in their own worlds and speaking their own language, and they don't really stop to explain things to you carefully or give you thoughtful feedback. I think it can be really inconsistent and hard to know who you're dealing with. And I think when you're, with something as sensitive as writing, it can be really, especially in a freelance context too, maybe you've never met them, and so you don't necessarily feel very comfortable sharing something with them and having this kind of intimate experience where you're dialoguing back and forth over a piece of writing that you've put a lot of your skill and thought into, and maybe some of your like imagination. And so it's kind of, I've had some experiences that challenged me in being edited by other people, and I've helped myself work through those by speaking with older people who have been in that particular sector for a lot longer than me to get their opinion on it. So, if you get like a draft back from an editor, from me, for example, and it's like in complete disarray and some of the comments are actually quite offensive or incomprehensible or poorly inserted into the text, or, it's just a bit all over the place. Like I would just forward it to someone and be like, is this normal, do you think? And hear the feedback from them being like, this is actually outrageous. It's not, you don't know this because this is your first time being edited for this kind of writing, but this is absolutely, not the way that it should be done. So seeking feedback from people who are more experienced than you, if you have access to them, like a trusted teacher, mentor, supervisor, or friend, or other writers, is really useful in that getting perspective on it. Because I think that when we get critique that's not very sensitive, it can be really easy to just like be like, it's me, it's because I suck. This is confirming all of my assumptions about the fact that my writing is bad, or, it can play into your insecurities and confirm if you have any sort of self-doubt. It can really play on that. So I think just seeking second opinions, basically.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And I think, that's really useful also because, like if you talk to other writers, you can also get a sense of how the editing process varies, you know, place to place or for different kinds of writing or different kinds of publication. And I think that's been, the way it works in sort of like, say, literary publications is so different from kind of more like newsy media outlets or digital media outlets. And yeah, I think, I mean, some of the, I would also say, like, don't think that a light edit is always a good edit. Like, don't necessarily read that as like something flattering. Like, a light edit could also just be a really busy editor who's like super overworked and has very little time for each piece. And some of the editing, like the heavier and more involved editing, can be the stuff that helps you the most as a writer, you know, especially when it is really thoughtful. So yeah, like that can be, I think, scary, because I think when I've been on the other side as an editor, like you know, when I was working in journalism, like my writers would actually like compare with each other when they got their drafts back and be like, oh my God, this is so much red, or, you know, this is so many track changes, or this is few, but that's not. But, you know, I think the best editing moments were when we actually had time to like really sit down and reshape a story and like pick out, I don't know, just like develop a strategy together for sharpening it and you know, deepening it. So, but yeah, that process looks very different depending on whether it's, you know, fiction or an essay or you know, a feature. Yeah. How do you approach that as an editor? Like, how do you give feedback? I guess I'm sure some of the audience will also be working as editors.
I try my hardest to refer outwards as frequently as possible as well. So I actually am not the only person that will do an edit on something. And I do think that that's a really effective way of working. Like, if you have the capacity to bounce things around as a team, that's really helpful as an editor. Because you're right, like, I mean, I've had experiences being edited where, yeah, like someone will give me a really, really light edit, and then I'll think that that's all good. And then several weeks later, maybe their coworker has actually cross-checked it and been like, there are all these problems with this piece. And they come back with a whole different set of feedback. And I think that to minimize distress to the writer and to yourselves, and to make sure that your deadlines aren't pushed back and back further and further, I would say, like, making sure that cross-checking happens first rather than going back and forth with the writer. Just going off your own bat, if you can, is really handy.
Yeah, I would say that's definitely one of the most like disheartening and stressful things as a writer, is when you've got something back from your editor, especially if it's like a publication you're not that familiar with and they haven't explained their process to you. So you're assuming, I guess, say with like a literary publication, often you just get the one edit, or you're only dealing with the one editor, right? And then sometimes, if it's like a second person, whether that's like, I guess like a higher level editor, or you've had like a developmental editor and then a copy editor, or you've got a legal team or whatever, if it's like you think you're already like close and then you get something that's like a giant spanner in the works, that's really stressful. I think being as clear as you can about the process of like, what is that, what does the pipeline look like from, I guess, when you first start discussing a piece through to publication, like how many stages is it going through, what's happening behind the scenes, and what is going to be transparent to the writer. I think that's really important. Often I've had things published and they haven't told me as well, which is also super annoying. Like, I have I have like Google alerts for my name, and so often I'm just like, oh, my story's up, like no one told me. And then, or I start getting people sending my story to me and I didn't realize it was published because I'd been waiting like a week from, you know, the last draft, and no one gave me a publication date. So yeah, I think like obviously editors are like really overworked almost all the time, but you know, things like that can make a big difference to the mental health of your contributors if you try and keep them as much in the loop, especially with you know, if you do get feedback, because getting like comments from readers without knowing, you know, that your work's gone out and where it is really wild.
Yeah, and I think also on the other side of that too, like if you get someone's draft from them and you're looking at it and you're like, I don't think we can publish this, tell the writer as soon as you can.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if it's not of quality and you don't intend to publish it, don't mess them around.
Yeah, that's probably one of the biggest mistakes I've made as an editor, I think, is trying to make something work when, you know, it's kind of taking it too far, like should have just said no in the first place. If you need to like completely you know, if you need to reshape something like too much, maybe it's like not salvageable, I guess, or it's just going to be a tricky relationship as well. Yeah. What else should we talk about? Is there anything that's that has, I guess, actually no, in terms of the practical stuff or the material thing of getting published, getting paid, like how do you especially when you're starting out, like what have you learned about that process, especially anything that surprised you?
Well, I think looking back on my earlier years writing, I definitely didn't know what I was entitled to as a writer, and I definitely feel like I was like taken advantage of and scammed quite a bit as a younger writer by, you know, publications where, yeah, like it just can feel like such a, yeah, I guess you're not trained to see yourself as a worker, really. In many ways, as you know, when you're in the creative industries, you're not really trained to think of yourself as a writer who's entitled to being paid for your hours that you're putting in and for the labor that you're doing. So that's something that I think I reflect on a little bit now, that I wouldn't accept those conditions for myself anymore, even though what I was writing was pretty good compared with what I'm writing now as well. Yeah, practically also, I think it's taken me a lot of time to get a little bit of like, yeah, just I guess skills in like managing, I guess, what is essentially a business in my creative practice, like a small business, and take myself seriously in that way and take responsibility for that, I suppose.
Yeah.
It can be really hard too because, yeah, again, like thinking about agility, like you're managing multiple income streams because you have to, because writing doesn't pay very well. So yeah, thinking about the financial strain and the other kinds of toll that can take on you to be having multiple jobs. It is inherently stressful, I think, to be managing multiple projects and to not have your like a boss who's there to structure your time and give you like the kinds of safeguards that a workplace has for like looking after your well-being, I suppose.
Yeah, and the kinds of like regulation, like minimum wage, and you know, like minimum
sick leave.
Yeah. I think where like when you're starting out, you're so trained / brainwashed / exploited into thinking that like it's a privilege to you know, be published at all or to be in this industry at all. That you don't deserve anything, and often like, and I think also like I often thought, oh, I'm getting underpaid because I'm slow, or like, you know, other people write faster, and then, you know, gradually learning that like per word rates were higher, you know, in the 90s than they are now, was like a real eye-opener, being like, oh wait, this isn't a problem with my individual like work ethic or, you know, whatever you think it is, whatever you're sort of like scammed into thinking it is. This is sort of an industry-wide problem. And yeah, I think trying to, like, it's been useful to, I think, be more involved in like the labor movement, to be honest, and organizing not only sort of within writing and the arts as this sort of like as this specialized like ivory tower thing, but with like other precarious workers and other industries, and having a sense of like having a sense of your labor and what can be improved in that regard.
Yeah. Like considering yourself as an artist, because you are, but also as a worker at the same time, and having a healthy, balanced perspective around that, I think.
Yeah. It is so romanticized, I think, the like the poverty, the stress, like it's sort of, you know, this like starving artist mentality, where you think that, like, I don't know, I definitely went through thinking that like being committed to a writing practice or a creative practice meant kind of suffering, you know, and and that you know, I would all like, I could always just work more and work harder, and then I don't know. Yeah, I think it's like a really unhealthy mentality, actually.
I think it's something we can be trained into by other workforces, like experience in other workforces as well. If you're living in a casualized workforce and you sort of indoctrinated into that agility, versatility mentality that, you know, you have to be available, flexible, and like completely committed, no matter what, even if the work that you're doing isn't actually very, you know, it's not life or death, but other people can make you feel like it's life or death, that you must do the work and you must do it as quickly as possible, and you have to be able to be switching tabs, switching tasks, and switching skills all the time too. Then I think it becomes easier to accept those conditions as a writer in the industry, but it's not right.
Yeah, and it can be better. Like, it can be improved. This isn't, you know, it's not inevitable that the industry is the way it presently is.
I think we've got to wrap up pretty soon. Right. Do you have anything else that you wanted to say in this session before we close it? Is the personal essay dead, for example?
No, I don't think it's dead. I think it's transformed. I don't know. I still read writing in that sort of vein that I enjoy. And there are still a shit ton of memoirs being published, I will say. I feel like I get sent a memoir like every month. But as much as I enjoyed the like personal essay moment, I think that the way that it's sort of been backgrounded a bit is probably a good thing, actually.
What has been its successor?
I'm not sure, actually. I think... Yeah, no, I don't know. What do you think? Do you feel like there's like one dominant mode of writing at the moment?
I feel like there is, but I'm struggling to name it. It's like that kind of like genre bending mentality as well. Again, maybe aligned with that agility idea too that the arts is taking on. Like the formlessness as a form. Like the hybrid essay.
Yeah, aren't all essays hybrid essays though? I think, anyway, I'm not sure.
But
like,
I think there's
an essay is already, you know, like, does it mean anything to add hybrid to essay?
No, but I do think
necessarily like a space of hybridity.
I think there's a structuralism around that that's coming up in the last year or two that I'm interested in. that gets poetic and investigative journalist, but mostly it's an essay about. I just followed about 5,000 tabs on Wikipedia, and now I'm going to describe that experience to you. That's kind of
right, like process driven, show you're working kind of thing. Yeah.
Like brushing across many topics, but not really doing an investigative deep dive into any of them, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, all right. Maybe that's it. All right. Let's leave the listener with that. You can ponder what the next big thing is.
You can at Jinghua on Twitter if you have an answer.
Sure, at me on Twitter with anything you like. I'm too much on Twitter, but yeah.
All right.
Sweet. Well, thanks for doing this with me.
Yep.
Catch you soon.